A paper came out last week, maybe the week before, from Citibank. I'm going to read you like 4 sentences from it. It said, "Who would have thought 5 years ago that the U.S. would become a net petroleum exporting country, edging out Russia as the world's largest refined petroleum exporter? That the U.S. would be generating more electricity from gas than coal, that German utilities would profit warn with some gas power stations running for less than 10 days a year because solar has stolen peak demand, or that utilities would be putting on hold conventional generation projects and building renewable capacity in their stead, even without sizable subsidies or incentives. The energy market has changed dramatically in recent years, and we believe that this mix is only going to alter more rapidly going forwards." Are we in a new era? Have we really turned the corner?
Yes.
Great. Andy?
Well, the era that I described in that song is clearly fading, in the sense that there are new norms are coming. As gas was mentioned there, though, gas is still it's the most disruptive thing right now. Amory might think differently about when you look at the gross layout of things. And how that plays out in the future depends largely on whether countries outside the United States and here in the United States, they find better ways to get it out of the ground without leakage and without concerns about water. And those are really hard hurdles that the Obama administration hasn't really adequately addressed yet.
Right. I think there's more fundamental issues than that. So let me back up a couple of steps. Efficiency was almost twice as important as gas last year in displacing U.S. carbon emissions. Last year, the weather-adjusted electricity used to make $1 of GDP fell 3.4%. We never had anything like that before. And it's, our peak electricity, like our peak gasoline, was in 2007. So a lot has already started turning. It is a turning supertanker. It takes a while, but the vectors are pretty clear. Now, frac gas is not cheap. And I'm not talking here about externalities, but about two other things. One is the dry gas is uneconomic at today's prices, so the gas that is coming out of fracking is a byproduct of valuable oil. Oil is worth 4 times as much as gas in the market now. But the number of wells and the number of plays that have oil is rather small, and it depletes faster. So there's a 10 or 15-year oil bubble after which you face the dry gas price, which is unpromising. And gas prices are volatile, and the more low and stable wellhead prices are, the more volatile the downstream prices become because of petrochemical pivot to gas, LNG exports, and downstream bottlenecking. Now, if you're comparing gas with efficiency renewables, which have no fuel, therefore no fuel price volatility, you need to count the value of the volatility, not just the spot bare commodity price. So that adds $2 or $3 or $4 to the gas price. It makes it even less interesting. And by the way, my own utility in Colorado, Excel, is already buying a lot of wind and solar because it has a lower levelized cost than combined cycle gas power. So I think, and by the way, there are about 8 major risks and uncertainties, you correctly mentioned a couple of them, about fracking that will take about a decade to play out. So if they're all satisfactorily resolved, we will have a lower supply curve for gas, longer, flatter, et cetera, than we used to think, and optionality is good, but 8's a pretty big number, so I wouldn't place a big bet on all of them coming in right, and in that case, we won't be unduly disappointed because we weren't going to need that much gas anyway. So there is a really important story here about abundant, stably priced energy for the long term, but the story is less about gas than about its carbon-free competitors that are outpacing and increasingly outcompeting it, namely efficiency of renewables.
So, but the city excerpt I just read is a pretty rosy scenario, and we're still at, if you don't include hydropower, we're still at 1% or less than 1% renewables in the 5%,
including hydro.
Solar. I guess it was solar. I'm sorry, it was solar.
Yeah. Just solar.
Yeah, right. So we're 5%. That's not yet a critical mass in terms of a tipping point, I guess.
So why is the industry so petrified about a 1% competitor? Because of the way it scales. We used to think you had to take 10 years to build a multi-billion-dollar cathedral to make electricity. But in that decade, you can now build each year a photovoltaic fab, which each year thereafter will produce enough solar modules to produce each year thereafter as much electricity from that one plant's 1 year's output as your cathedral would have produced after a decade. So the scaling can be incredibly fast. Yeah. And you know, China just set a 35 gigawatt installed PV goal for 2015. That's 5 quarters from now, or 5 to 8 quarters from now. And that'll soak up the surplus real fast. Japan has 19.5 gigawatts of photovoltaics in the already approved pipeline. So the two of them are now a third of the world's solar market and taking over. So, you know, I think the way that this upends business models is really quite profound. That's why in our electricity innovation lab that RMI has convened the industry around, they've been working out some really interesting new business and revenue and regulatory models, grid integration, grid security, all the hard stuff. And the most interesting part of that is that the Fort Collins Municipal Utility in Colorado, they're about to roll out a bidirectional value tariff where the utility and the customers pay each other the fair value of the services they exchange. That's, I think, a nice way forward past net metering, which is a great way to start, but then breaks at scale.
Sorry.
Well, I was going to ask you, Andy, and I'm wondering if what Amory just described fits what you told me the other day, which is that when it comes to energy, we need to be focusing less on goals and more on traits. First of all, explain what that means, and is that part, is this shared value, for example, is that one example of that?
Well, I've used that way of expressing what we need globally in terms of when you look at communities and individuals, and most of our goals, like under the treaty process, everyone's talking about 80% by 2050. All these numbers come out. But when you look at the realities, and you realize there isn't going to be a top-down magic kind of comprehensive binding treaty.
And no government's going to mandate something that's going to take us.
The things that will take us in the direction of those goals. Directionality counts more than goals to me. Like, don't talk to me about, people have been punishing me for not saying whether I'm a 350 guy. Is my goal 350 parts per million? As long as we're heading up, don't talk to me about something that's down here. Finding ways, traits that you would need in a society to start bending curves.
Process, not outcome.
Process, not outcome.
Otherwise, it takes too long to get there, and you can't wait that long to see if you got there. You need to know if you're heading in the right direction.
And most of those goals are, you know, the 2-degree threshold is not set by science so much as by values. In other words, we grew out of the European Union, and there's a long story behind the 2-degree threshold. But the idea that, and then of course the danger with setting tipping points is once you've passed them, then it's like, okay, we're screwed. So let's just, what do you do then?
Let's go party. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, what I see is the traits that I focus on are everything from reach. Reach is the word for reach out. In other words, empathy, sharing information and ideas. Teach, making sure we're adequately educating our kids. I looked at that network system, the grid that was here. I would love to see that in schools.
The microgrid we have.
Yeah, you know, have our visible electricity infrastructure in our schools. One of the great classes that I don't see taught is, let's go look at our furnace today, folks. You know, have the kids go into the boiler room. Have the kids look at the electric bill for their school. So teaching that energy matters, not in a chiding way, but just like this is us on energy. And then you can develop kids who are interested in pursuing these kinds of goals as well.
And I think another of the changes in our how we think about climate that's coming right at us and overdue is that solving this problem is not really going to require, I think, international agreements so much as it'll be driven by the private sector and civil society and coevolution. Spread by military innovation. In other words, run by our effective institutions and running the ineffective ones. You might think about, how did China make energy efficiency its top strategic priority for national development in the 11th five-year plan in 2005? It wasn't because a treaty made them do it. There wasn't one. It's because people like Montebaugh understood that otherwise China couldn't afford to develop because the supply side would eat the budget. So it was enlightened economic self-interest, exactly the same that we hope to be able to inform in the 13th five-year plan in our Reinventing Fire collaboration with China. And
I mean, but they were literally running out of oxygen in China. I mean, in the cities, I mean, they literally can't breathe. I mean, so they...
Which is another imperative.
That certainly concentrates the mind wonderfully, yeah.
I was just there a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I'm going there in a few weeks.
The point there, Amory, is that there's a, it's overused to call burning platform, but there's something that they really here and now, and it affects everybody. Here we don't have that, and people are all, you know, focused on other things, and you know, and it's
but that's exactly the point. We're focused on a lot of different things. We have a lot of different values and priorities. So I think we need to get over trying to inflict our sense of climate urgency on people and say, you have to do this because of climate urgency. I was just meeting with a very distinguished filmmaker and his sponsor who want to make a climate solutions film. And it turned out they wanted to spend the first third or half of it talking about the urgency of the climate problem. I said, look, skip that stuff, cut to the chase. People are hungry for solutions.
I can't tell you how many...
And they said, why would you skip it? I said, well, look, if you have an audience member who thinks this is an urgent problem, you don't need to tell them again. They'll be bored and depressed. You can't depress people into action. And if they don't believe it, you'll just annoy them and they won't listen to the other half anyway. So why do all that? Just go for solutions and orient the solutions toward many different motives. You may want to do efficiency and renewables because of national security, or because of jobs, or profits, or competitive advantage, or creation care, or public health, or environmental stewardship, or climate protection. It doesn't matter. Let's focus on outcomes, not motives. We don't then need to agree about which outcome is most important. You don't need to like every outcome. One will do. Any one will do. And then we can get on with the stuff we agree ought to be done for whatever reason. Respect all our different reasons. No one is automatically the most important. And then the stuff we don't agree about becomes superfluous.
Well, this has come out really powerfully also in the social science research on these issues. The same body of studies that show why we don't get the climate problem, you know, why we literally don't get it, show, this is work out of Yale and other places, show that the same people who have these fistfights over global warming are in sync on energy. I showed these slides that illustrate this powerfully, where back in 2009, this Yale team did a survey where they split America into 6 Americas. There's six kinds of Americans on global warming. They range from dismissive to alarmed. And those bubbles change size over time. But so you ask those people questions about global warming or a cap and trade bill. When they asked about the cap and trade bill, 2009, the run up to the big, you know, fail, even the people who were alarmed about global warming were kind of meh. My son uses this word meh, you know, kind of about cap and trade. But when you ask the same people questions about energy efficiency, or even a mandate for a 45-mile-a-gallon standard for cars that would cost $1,000 more, you ask that question, and the only people who are not kind of maybe about that are the dismissives. Everybody else is either kind of maybe or absolutely yes. And so when you have all that potential for agreement on energy wisdom, wise policy on energy, why would you fight perpetual fight over global warming?
Yeah, and you know, one of the best pieces on that I heard is from NASCAR. There's a guy named Mike Lynch who's the head of sustainability for NASCAR, and they have done quite a bit of research on what they call NASCAR Nation. NASCAR, as you may well know, is the largest spectator sport in the United States.
100 million people.
And it's incredible amounts, and they have done a lot of work on sustainability, and it turns out that NASCAR Nation is extremely pro-renewables. Why? Because about 1/3 of them are in the building trades. They're carpenters, they're plumbers, they're electricians, and it's jobs.
That's interesting.
They see it as jobs, and we haven't framed this very well in that regard.
Well, unfortunately, so much of the dynamic in the environmental movement growing out of the 20th century was still focused on the Beltway, on the next piece of legislation. So when you focus on this as a legislative strategy, you end up with this being, just like we just saw the last 48 hours, it's all partisanship and pointing fingers about climate denial and stuff. Unfortunately, that's why there isn't this sort of logic often to these
but
situations.
Fortunately, we don't actually need acts of Congress to do everything we need to do about energy, because there's $5 trillion of net present value savings on the table.
Right, and you've said that to solve the energy problem, you said this famously many, many times, that we need to enlarge the problem rather than, and integrate it. What does that mean? How does that look like?
Well, let's see. General Eisenhower reputedly said, his library doesn't think he actually said it, that if the problem's too difficult to solve, you need to enlarge it, to push the boundaries out until they embrace what the solution requires, more options, more synergies, more degrees of freedom. So, for example, when you integrate transport, buildings, industry, and electricity, the four things that use energy, it is a lot easier to solve the auto and electricity problems together than separately. And that kind of integration means expanding our boundaries not only across all four sectors, but to all four main kinds of innovation. That is not just technology and public policy, but also design, the way we combine technologies, and strategy, new business models, new competitive strategies. And when you play with a full deck like that with all four kinds of innovation, you get, as we did in Reinventing Fire, an extraordinary expansion of opportunity, especially deeply disruptive business opportunities. A lot of that is coming out in our discussions at this conference. And I think, you know, we couldn't find anyone else who had quite done that expand and integrate trick, but the results were astounding.
Are there any examples anywhere in the world where you're starting to see that take shape?
Within, I think probably Denmark would be the best example, and some of it's emerging in Germany.
You know, you see.
Oh, not the conference, but
no, God, no.
In the country, no.
No, but there's systems thinking is much more how things happen there. Although that's, you know, systems thinking is almost un-American. That's the issue we face. The idea that, well, look, I live in the Hudson Valley, and there, for 80 years, there's been a regional plan association for New York and the region. Probably some of you were from there. But they roll out these plans, but every county ends up completely competitive with the other county. No one is thinking regionally and acting regionally. And that's just one example of how antithetical that kind of thinking is to American
But you're right, Copenhagen is a city that works a lot of ways. Amsterdam is another interesting one.
Well, there's no really, like waste heat is harvested.
Did a lot in that direction.
Yeah.
But there's no one place that we can say this is a microcosm of where this is taking shape, all these different four kinds of innovation, all the sort of the technologies.
Close. Yeah.
Right, well, I'm looking for one.
Yeah. And a lot of that's happening in Germany. Some of it's happening in places here. I mean, why is it that the CEO of SDG&E, San Diego, says that within another 2 or 3 years, and this was a year ago he said this, his fossil-fueled power plants will be turned off on sunny afternoons because solar power is growing so fast there. It's also ground zero for electric vehicles. Everything's converging there at once, and it's just going way faster than new business models, new regulatory models. So, yeah, we got a lot of work to do fast, but the same things that give utility executives the heebie-jeebies give venture capitalists sweet dreams.
Yeah.
And with the kinds of entrepreneurial skill in this room, there is a lot happening real fast. We're doing a lot of experiments in parallel, also between states, between cities. We have a very diverse federal system, so it's a lab. You try a lot of stuff and see what works.
Yeah. And I think what's really important is to look around and try to identify the administrative, financial, legal impediments to having things speed up. So much of this is not about technology. When I talk to young audiences, the people who are not engineering students think they don't have a role here, but they do so much. And this, I'm going to just divert very briefly into another arena. A couple of years ago, I had a stroke. I wrote about it as my lucky stroke. Just Google for that and you'll find it. And I learned all about telemedicine, which was not, they didn't have the capacity in the hospital where I was, so they were lollygagging and dragging their feet, and they were about to send me out, even though I was literally in the process of having a stroke. They wanted to send me home. And, but what I learned about telemedicine is the technology is there. It's like, it's Skype on steroids. It's very easy. The best neurologist in the world can be in any emergency room evaluating a patient. And the impediments are all institutional, financial. Medicare doesn't reimburse unless the doctor is at your bedside physically, you know, because that was the old concern about fraud. Actually, telemedicine is easier to safeguard against things like fraud, because it's a record of everything. So, and so that made me really cognizant of this reality that technology is not the problem. It's these softer issues. And so there's great opportunities for innovation. There are solar mosaic. Billy Parrish, I don't know if he's at this meeting, he, to me, epitomizes his life story. It's so cool. He started out as a blockading student in the hallway in Montreal climate talks. I met him in 2005. And now he's helping run
Mosaic,
this company with this new model for how to facilitate financing for solar. And they have their own impediments of making it national. But finding the ways to, once you identify those things, finding what knobs can you tweak that can take down some of those barriers is really important. I'm sure you run up against this all the time.
Yeah, and let me get back to the notion of deeply disruptive business models. One of our folks, Jamie Mandel, published about a month ago a blog saying, gee, there's enough juice in the business models around Solar City, Sunrun, Sungevity, SunEdison, where they put solar on your roof with no money down and beat your utility bill. There's enough surplus you can wring out in there as the costs come down, especially on balance of system, that you could actually make it not no money down, but cash back to put solar on your roof. What would that do to the adoption rate? Or another one that Dave Moskovitz at RAP just came up with, Regulatory Assistance Project. I got here 2 plug-in hybrid Prius cars. This one I'll sell you for $20,000, or this one I'll sell you for $10,000 if, when it's parked and plugged in, you allow me to do, as an automaker, to do aggregated transactions with whatever utility you're parked in at the time, I can be a really effective aggregator. It's worth more than $10,000 to me to do that, and I promise not to interfere in any way with your car-owning capability and experience. Well, I think a lot of people would take the $10,000 discount because that asset is sitting idle 96% of the time, and you don't care. It's just, let it do other things and earn money. So you'd get a lot more bidirectional cars out that way.
So, are we in a place now with this scenario that we started off with Citi and the great innovations that are happening, that we just sit back and watch it happen?
No.
What do we need to do?
You jump in with all 4 feet.
Well, maybe, but is there a train that we just sort of get on, or is there a huge need for new policies? Maybe not technologies, although they will by themselves improve. Behavioral changes. Where do we need to be pushing right now?
I'd say most of the leadership now is in the private sector, in its co-evolution with civil society, and at the state and municipal level, and in the military. And do you see it's definitely not in Congress, so
private
don't
sector,
hold your breath.
Big companies, utilities, energy companies, or the entrepreneurs?
All of the above. Okay. One of the fun things about our e-lab is that the incumbents and insurgents have a safe place to talk to each other and create value instead of just lobbing grenades, because there's at least a half dozen ways that incumbents can respond to insurgents. At least 4 of them are intelligent and mutually profitable. Ostrich is not a good one. Blocking is not a good one because it annoys the customers, so they drop off faster. But some of the others are really interesting.
Yeah. What do you want to push on, Andy? Where do we go? What do we do?
Well, I grew up a middle child. My blogging style is to kind of work, not to yell and say this is what I think, but to kind of listen to everybody and figure out a way forward. So in that sense, I look for overlap. And I'll give you one other arena where there's overlap. The Heritage Foundation wants to end energy subsidies. Many people I know in the environmental movement, well, some want to end fossil energy subsidies. So there's overlap there, and as I said earlier, there are libertarians who love free enterprise and who want a free enterprise. So getting rid of the polarization where possible is important.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on a panel with the chairman of ExxonMobil saying he wants to end all energy subsidies, but they will, of course, disagree about what's the subsidy. So here's a way to find out. Now that Ed Markey's in the Senate, imagine that, let's say, Doug Koplow advises GAO and CBO on a really well-informed, broad, nonpartisan study of who's getting what energy subsidies. And then Ed Markey runs the Senate hearing. He has a bunch of sworn energy executives up there. And he says to them, let's see, Mr. Jones, looks like your industry got $11.3 billion from that subsidy last year. Mr. Jones, yours got 7.6. Senator, those aren't subsidies.
Right.
Oh, so you wouldn't mind if we took them away, would you? That's how you tell if they're a subsidy.
Right.
And it would be really interesting to smoke out corporate socialists masquerading as free marketeers.
Yeah. I bet there's a few of those.
I like it.
Well, we're being smoked out, unfortunately.
Yeah.
This clock has hit 0, and we've barely got going here. But there's so much we can talk about, but on the other hand, these people have been talking for the last 3 days, coming together with big companies, insurgents, cities, and various parts of the corporate world, not just energy and sustainability, but fleets and facilities and all the different pieces. And that's this convergence that we've made happen here. You guys have been showing the way, you for almost 40 years, or maybe 40, more than 40. So your famous soft path piece was about 35 years ago, something like that?
1976.
Yeah, right, 37 years ago. And this is really just, I think, a just great cap on what we've been talking about for the last 3 days, that the technologies exist, that there's huge behavioral changes, but we are on a path that's really exciting and energizing in lots of different ways for those in this room and the communities that we represent. So we've got one more piece of business to transact as a conference before we send people back to their good homes and places. But for now, I just can't thank you both enough for the incredible voices you have in this space, the great work that you do, and really the leadership that you have paved the way for all of us. So please join me in thanking Andy Revkin and Amory Lovins. Thank you, everybody.